Hello and welcome to this explainer. Listen, right now there are literally billions of dollars in hardware just sitting entirely useless at borders across the globe. Why? Simply because buyers couldn't prove where the materials actually came from. I am absolutely thrilled to share this with you today because we're looking at a fundamental shift in how the most successful companies are operating. If you're an executive, an investor, or a decision maker dealing with complex supply chains, especially in energy storage and battery hardware, this explainer is exactly for you. Today, we're completely transforming how you view compliance. Forget that old idea that it's just an annoying paperwork burden or some bureaucratic hurdle. By the time we wrap up, you'll see exactly why true transparency is actually your ultimate risk management tool.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1. The end of the black box, a paradigm shift in procurement.
So we're witnessing the absolute death of the old way of doing business. For decades, procurement strategy was pretty straightforward, right? You found a supplier, negotiated the best price, and just trusted that the goods would show up. Well, that era is definitively over. The days of treating your supply chain as some impenetrable mystery are gone, and honestly, decision makers who haven't realized this yet are putting massive investments in severe jeopardy. I want you to really let this quote sink in. The days of accepting the origins of our battery components as a black box are over. Treating the origins of your components as an unknown black box, where you have no clue where the raw materials came from or whose hands they passed through, it's just no longer acceptable. In today's highly volatile geopolitical market, what you don't know absolutely will hurt you. Ignorance isn't an excuse anymore. It's a massive financial liability.
And that brings us to a really core reality of the modern market. Visibility is the new currency. In a landscape that's constantly defined by sudden geopolitical shifts, changing trade laws, and extreme market volatility, having a clear line of sight into your supply chain is way more than just a corporate buzzword. It is the ultimate risk management tool. It's literally the very asset that allows you to pivot when tariffs hit or when a specific region gets sanctioned overnight.
And this brilliantly illustrates a massive strategic divide we're seeing in the industry right now. On the left, you've got the old mindset, prioritizing upfront pricing. If you're still building your procurement strategy around getting the absolute cheapest initial cost without knowing the origin, you are quite literally building your portfolio on sand. I mean, it looks great right up until the tide comes in. But on the right, we have the new reality, deep supply chain traceability and FEOC, or Foreign Entity of Concern compliance. This is not just about following rules. This is about building an ironclad competitive shield around your entire business.
Section 2. The deceptive security, the danger of half measures.
Here is where it gets really tricky. A lot of organizations think they're protected, but they're relying on half measures that are creating a highly dangerous illusion of safety. They check a few boxes and just assume their multi-million-dollar investments are perfectly secure. But simply knowing who sold you the battery, it's just not enough anymore. If your due diligence stops at a superficial Tier 1 check, meaning you only vet the immediate vendor handing you the final product, you're leaving your projects incredibly vulnerable. The components inside that battery have traveled the globe. If you only know the final link in that chain, you've got a false sense of security that's going to vanish the very second regulators ask for proof of origin.
To really understand what deep supply chain visibility actually means, we have to look at the full life cycle. Step 1 is raw material extraction. Where exactly is that lithium or cobalt coming out of the ground? Step 2 is the precursor stage. Where are those raw materials being refined and chemically processed? And finally, Step 3 is cell assembly. FOEC compliance changes this entire process. You can't just certify Step 3 anymore. You must have a verified, transparent thread connecting that assembly all the way back to the actual mine. Only companies that understand their supply chain this deeply can reliably plan for the future.
So the crucial point is that these regulatory barriers, they're not going away. In fact, they're hardening. They are rapidly becoming the definitive filter for project bankability. If you're out there seeking funding, investors and banks are looking at these regulations as the ultimate gatekeepers. If you can't prove deep supply chain compliance, your project is not bankable, period. The capital will simply flow to a competitor who can actually prove their supply chain is clean.
Section 3. Compliance as a competitive advantage, the new standard for success.
We really need a major shift in thinking here. It's time to move from defense to offense. When you stop looking at transparency as a tax on your business, you start to see it for what it truly is, the absolute new standard for market success. FEOC compliance is rarely defined properly. We aren't talking about dry legal jargon here. We're defining it by its true function. It is the only instrument that actually secures your investment against the next geopolitical shock. When trade wars escalate or new tariffs drop out of nowhere, the companies scrambling to figure out where their parts come from are going to have to halt operations. But the companies with FEOC compliance,
They already know. They're insulated. They survive the shock.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how this creates a massive operational divide in time to market. On the left, you see companies relying on sales representatives or middlemen to just assure them everything is fine. On the right, you have companies utilizing modern traceability software and conducting direct supplier audits. When the market shifts, the company on the right adapts instantly because they actually have the data. The company on the left, they're stuck waiting for a phone call, bleeding critical market share by the minute.
Section 4. The true ROI. Beyond the balance sheet.
It is definitely time to reframe the return on investment for compliance. We've got to look way beyond the balance sheet. Stop counting the pennies spent on software or audits, and instead look at the massive disasters you're actively avoiding. These tangible benefits of transparency represent your true ROI. First up, it severely lowers the risk of catastrophic project stops. Just imagine having hundreds of millions of dollars tied up in a build that grinds to a halt because of one compliance audit. Second, it prevents supply interruptions. You know exactly where bottlenecks might happen long before they actually do. And third, it avoids sudden customs problems. There is absolutely nothing worse for an executive than hearing a vital multi-million-dollar shipment got seized at the border just because the paperwork didn't prove the origin of the raw materials. True transparency prevents all of this. Let's move to and see how this builds into our final section. Section 5, Flying Blind or Market Access, the final verdict.
Every single concept we've covered today leads to a very stark choice about how you'll operate moving forward. Who cannot see the chain steers the ship blind. If you treat transparency as just some bureaucratic hurdle to jump over, rather than the very shield that protects your business, you're essentially standing at the helm of a multi-million-dollar ship wearing a blindfold. In a volatile world, hoping you won't hit an iceberg is just not a viable corporate strategy. You must be able to see the entire chain.
So, I ask you to take a hard look at your own procurement strategy right now. Are you just buying hardware, or are you securing your market access? Because if you're only focused on acquiring that physical battery or component at the lowest possible price, you're missing the bigger picture. Without compliance, that hardware is entirely useless because you won't even be allowed to access the market to use it. You aren't just buying steel and lithium, you're buying the right to operate securely.
I want to leave you with this final, vital question to really reflect on. Look at your current operations today. Do you have full transparency down to the precursor level right now? Or are you simply relying on your suppliers to tell you the truth? Because in today's landscape, blind trust is the biggest risk of all. Demand visibility, secure your supply chain, and turn transparency into your greatest advantage. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Start looking deeper into your supply chains today.